gunshots.
Violent reaction. We go to Ferguson, Missouri, following the protests and calls for peace in the Michael Brown case. Bad timing. Stormy weather moves up the East Coast just in time for one of this year's busiest travel seasons. Europe's demise. Pope Francis warns European leaders the continent risks losing its soul. And pay it forward. Generosity is passed on by members of a Chicago church congregation. Those stories and more on EWTN News Nightly for Tuesday, November 25th, 2014. Good evening. Thank you for joining us. I'm Brian Patrick with your news now. There is calm now after a night of chaos in Ferguson, Missouri. Rioting and looting followed a grand jury decision not to indict a white police officer in the shooting death of a black teen. Our team coverage begins tonight with Jason Calvi.
Brian, the weeks of pleas for peace ignored by some, police arrested 61 in the city, and tonight more National Guardsmen are being deployed, trying to make sure last night doesn't repeat itself. Attorneys for the Brown family criticized Monday's decision.
We strenuously objected to this prosecutor and this process.
And others from the community also objected, leaving behind destruction in Ferguson. Last night, protesters rushed through the streets, looting businesses, and leaving Ferguson in flames. About a dozen businesses were seriously damaged or destroyed, and at least 18 people were injured. The mayhem came right after the grand jury's announcement. The jurors sifted through 70 hours of testimony from 60 witnesses and sometimes conflicting stories. The prosecutor defended the process.
They are the only people who have heard and examined every witness and every piece of evidence. They discussed and debated the evidence among themselves before arriving at their collective decision.
After the remarks, 1,000 pages of case files were also released. But attorneys for the Brown family say they want more.
But we're going to hold out hope that at some point justice will be served and we will at least have a presentation of evidence that is fair and impartial, and then we would allow the chips to fall where they may.
And this evening, St. Louis Archbishop Robert Carlson is offering a special Mass for Peace and Justice in St. Louis. And Brian, he was there in Ferguson last night leading prayers as well.
All right, thank you, Jason. A friend of Officer Darren Wilson delivered a response to the verdict on Wilson's behalf this morning.
I would like to thank all of you for standing up for me during this stressful time. Your support and dedication is amazing, and it is still hard to believe that all of these people I have never met are doing so much for me. He closes with, "Please keep my family in blue in your hearts and prayers. They have all made a sacrifice to their own lives in order to work the excessive hours through the heat and rain to ensure that the riots and protests in Ferguson were as safe as they could be."
Ferguson's mayor said late today Wilson remains on administrative leave. He was put on leave the day after the shooting as the investigation got underway, and since then he has remained largely out of public view. Reaction from Ferguson is being monitored closely here in Washington. Chief White House correspondent Susanne LaFrankie continues our coverage tonight.
Good evening, Brian. The big question is, how involved should the federal government become in a local issue, especially after a grand jury has rendered a decision? The situation is fraught with race, emotion, and pure politics.
Flanked by Michael Brown's family, civil rights activists made an impassioned cry for federal intervention.
The federal government needs to step in to protect the rights of Michael Brown Jr. and to protect the rights of the citizens.
Monday night in a rare late-night press briefing, the president appealed for calm and understanding, pleading for both protesters and police to exercise restraint.
First and foremost, we are a nation built on the rule of law. And so we need to accept that this decision was the grand jury's to make. There are Americans who agree with it, and there are Americans who are deeply disappointed, even angry. It's an understandable reaction.
The Justice Department quickly launched an investigation following Brown's death. the focus of which is whether the victim's civil rights were violated by Officer Darren Wilson. Monday night, Attorney General Alan Holdren called Brown's death a tragedy, saying the federal investigation is ongoing. He went on to say this incident has sparked a national conversation about the need to ensure confidence between law enforcement and the communities they protect and serve. While constructive efforts are underway in Ferguson and communities nationwide, far more must be done to create enduring trust. Many legal experts agree investigators would need to meet a strict standard of proof to mount a credible prosecution. Tom Fitton, president of Judicial Watch, a conservative nonpartisan foundation, says the grand jury's decision reconfirms the prosecutor's initial findings.
Where is it that there's evidence that anything untoward happened here? Two investigations have resulted in clearing this officer, and you're still wasting resources pursuing it? What agenda is at work here? It's certainly not a rule of law agenda. It sounds to me like a political agenda.
Alan Holdren met with the president this afternoon to discuss best practices. He may be traveling to communities shortly to talk to community leaders and police departments. We're also being told that the president is considering traveling to Ferguson after Thanksgiving. That'll do it from here. Brian, back to you.
All right, thanks, Susanne LaFrankie. Bishop Harry Jackson, the senior pastor at Hope Christian Church, has been in Ferguson for the past few days. He joins us tonight from St. Louis by satellite. You and so many others work to keep peace there in Ferguson. Are you surprised by the response to the grand jury's decision?
I am not surprised. I think actually something happened to mitigate the damage that could have been done. So I'm not happy, but I believe it could have been much, much worse.
But there are still those who are very violent and there's destructive behavior. Isn't this possibly counterproductive to the civil rights movement?
It's absolutely counterproductive, but I think we've got to understand that Martin Luther King Jr., who's our great model in terms of civil rights in the nation, often talked about the beloved community. What he meant was the church in the nation should be the primary vehicle that God would use to bring human rights and to bring an advancement in terms of racial reconciliation to our land. And I believe that's just where we have really missed it. What's really happening is that we have social action movement, not a Christian movement of love, bringing people together in Christ. And there should be Roman Catholic as well as Protestant, as well as every division that we find in an urban church world. We should be working to cross this barrier and model what healing looks like.
There's so much fractionalization right now. How can healing begin?
Well, I think it'll begin by taking a page out of your Roman Catholic playbook, if you will, meaning think about the good works that the church does in the community. What if black, white, brown people were doing it together? What if we begin to encourage on a higher basis longer-term relationships? See, I believe that the sense of repression and being held back that many blacks have is because they live in a world that is isolated when they're at the lower end of the spectrum. If you're Beyonce, you don't have any problems. If you're the president, you're in a different strata. But if you're a poor black who has been in generational poverty, there needs to be a modeling, a demonstration of love to these people. The church can do that. It's a long-term process, though. It is not something that's going to happen overnight or with a court case. But if you start there, we can feed the poor, clothe the naked, visit the prisoners, then have prison aftercare in the black community, very critical. Another thing that we can do together is have churches adopt sister churches from suburbs to the urban areas, pulpit exchanges, joint events that they do, and develop deep friendships so that the beloved community can be recognized and embraced. That takes time. But in our lifetimes, we can make a difference.
So the answer is really in the body of Christ, and you made that case very, very clearly. Bishop Harry Jackson, the senior pastor at Hope Christian Church, thank you for joining us from St. Louis tonight.
Thank you.
Some of the other stories our EWTN News Nightly team has been covering in today's world. For the second time in recent months, Israel permits trucks to bring construction materials into the Gaza Strip. The materials are part of an effort to rebuild that war-torn territory following this summer's 7-week conflict. Israeli airstrikes against rocket launch sites destroyed buildings and infrastructure. More than 24 closely monitored trucks delivered cement for rebuilding Gaza. The Vatican News Agency reports Islamic State jihadists have destroyed the convent of the Sacred Heart in Mosul. Militants controlling the city used explosives to damage the Chaldean convent. Local media said the target appeared to be a cross standing in the church sanctuary. The Islamic State had used that convent as a base of operations. Some local sources think they abandoned the facility because of the imminent threat of air raids by the U.S.-led coalition. Pope Francis shared his vision for Europe's renewal during a brief visit to the European Parliament today. The Pope warned of impending crisis if a fair immigration policy isn't developed to help thousands of refugees. He also brought a message of hope to Europeans burdened by economic crisis. And the Holy Father touched on the continent's spiritual crisis. He said a Europe which is no longer open to the transcendent is a Europe that risks slowly losing its own soul. Joining us from Rome, Alan Holdren, who has just returned from Strasbourg, traveling on the papal plane with Pope Francis. Alan, give us a snapshot of the Pope's address to the European Parliament.
Well, the Pope was only there for a very brief period. He was only in Strasbourg for 8 hours. He made 2 speeches, in the first of which he highlighted a number of things that had to do with human dignity and human rights in Europe. He said that in Europe that tends to be very lonely and also very self-referential. People only look out for their own needs and are very individualistic. He said it gives the impression of a Europe being elderly and haggard. He invited Europe to rediscover the best of itself and to take on that individual nature and to bring it forward and to give hope to the population today.
And how was that message received?
Well, he got 10 rounds of applause in his very first speech. He got another couple in the second. That first speech was to the European Parliament. He spoke about issues that affect all people here in Europe. Migration. He called the Mediterranean a vast cemetery. He said that it's something that needs to be dealt with. These immigrants, of course, coming from Africa in particular and from the Middle East. He also got an ovation when he talked about family life and the family being the basic cell of society here. He also got an ovation for standing up for the rights of workers. He said that labor needs to be protected. This has been a staple of his pontificate. So between one thing and another, he got a very good reception there, even if in the streets of Strasbourg there weren't a lot of people.
Well, he didn't celebrate any masses. There was no contact really with Catholics in that region. This was really more of a diplomatic mission. Did you hear him speaking more as an European leader or in his role as pastor?
Well, he said in his first speech that he came as a pastor to give a message of hope. So he's speaking to all Europeans from that forum there of the European Parliament and then what they call the Council of Europe, another governing body that covers many nations throughout all of Europe. And so he was there as a pastor, but this was not a pastoral visit in the sense that he went and celebrated Mass. He will do that in France in the future. It has been announced that he will do that. He confirmed it today.
All right, finally, on the way back, he always gives a news conference on the plane. He was asked about ISIS. What did he say?
Well, he was asked about extremists, about ISIS in particular. He didn't mention ISIS when he gave his response, but he did say that we need to be careful not to shut the door to dialogue, that we always need to leave that door open, even if it seems like it may be impossible to make any headway. He said we need to leave the door open so that if there is a chance to find a way to negotiate peace and to end violence, it should be done.
All right, Alan Holdren, thank you for being our eyes and ears with Pope Francis on his quick trip to the European Parliament in Strasbourg. Thanks for joining us. Coming up, Catholic Charities treats the poor to a white linen Thanksgiving feast. We'll take you there. On Tuesday, November 25th, this is EWTN News Nightly. I'm Brian Patrick. Thanks for joining us. Americans are borrowing just a little more money, a sign of a slowly improving economy. The findings come from the Federal Reserve. The Fed says household debt grew by $78 billion last quarter to $11.7 trillion. The increase reflects more borrowing for mortgages and car loans. Economists say the larger debt means more people are confident borrowing, reflecting economic growth. Now, even with the increase, borrowing is still below its 2008 peak by $1 trillion. Well, there's snow in the forecast for parts of the Northeast going into Thanksgiving. A predicted nor'easter is expected to bring mostly rain, but could produce heavy snow accumulation further inland. The storm could cause major delays and other problems on roads and at the nation's airports. More than 41 million people are expected to travel this holiday weekend. The AAA recommends patience. Well, the holiday season always presents challenges for people concerned about their weight. Some restaurants will start helping us count calories, like it or not. The Food and Drug Administration just announced calorie labeling rules for restaurant chains with more than 20 outlets. Companies have 1 year to comply. According to the FDA, Americans eat and drink a third of our calories away from home. Hundreds of people with no place to go for Thanksgiving are enjoying a holiday feast served up by Catholic Charities here in D.C. As Wyatt Goolsby reports tonight, volunteers are pulling out all the stops and sharing one of our most cherished traditions.
Saying the week of Thanksgiving is busy at Catholic Charities D.C. would be an understatement. From preparing the turkey, sweet potatoes, green beans, and macaroni, workers here say today is the single busiest day of the year.
Wow, we started Wednesday. Actually, Saturday we started cooking the turkeys. Monday, we came in and sliced them, and like I said, our deliveries came in last Wednesday, and we've been at it ever since.
Catholic Charities normally serves food to some 1,500 people as part of various programs this time of the year. But tonight, it's not just about the food. Some 200 to 300 people without a place for Thanksgiving will get to sit down to a table, complete with white linen tablecloths inside the Pepco Art Gallery. Volunteers from across the city have joined with Catholic Charities to help in not only the preparations, but also to actually serve the meals.
I think everyone has their preconceived notions of how people who need assistance may act or how they may dress, and so the people who come in this door, they could look like you and I off the street, and you just never know when somebody needs a little bit of help.
For Monsignor John Insler, the president of DC's Catholic Charities, it's a joy every year to see volunteers work together to serve the homeless and hungry. He says serving others ties directly into the mission of the church.
We have a chance through service, through directly helping people to make that religion come alive. In other words, make that faith become active and real.
And for many, it's a reminder of what the holiday season is really all about. In Washington, Wyatt Goolsby, EWTN News 9.
Up next, the generous gift from a Chicago church is paid forward. Thanks for joining us for EWTN News Nightly on this Tuesday evening. I'm Brian Patrick. What would you do with an extra $500? Catherine Elliott reports some folks in Chicago are paying it forward.
An accomplished seamstress, retired from an insurance job. Eleanor Jordan says she's a woman of simple means.
I've been in situations where I was worried that I wouldn't have enough, and right then and there, I have to say, God will send somebody.
This fall, that somebody was her pastor with a surprise announcement.
You're going to be the ones, each one of you, who gets a check for $500 today. I know it sounds crazy, doesn't it?
The money was part of a major windfall the church got from a property deal. Pastor Laura Truex instructed parishioners to do with it what God called them to do. Some kept the money to pay bills. Most, however, decided to donate their $500 to various causes.
I didn't feel like the money was for me. I felt that it was God's money to pass on.
So Jordan gave $100 to a neighborhood art project that benefits young artists, and another $100 to a Chicago school that was recently spared from closure. The remaining $300 went to a cause closer to home.
My granddaughter. Aha, hey granddaughter. How are you? I am good.
Grandma Jelly, as she's known, wanted to help her granddaughter pay some of her college loans.
She's not a millionaire, but you know, she decided to give the money to me. She definitely could have kept it for herself. It encouraged me to help out more to other people.
If you're not giving, then you're closed in and you're not receiving.
That feeling of giving, she says, is worth more than any check. Catherine Elliott, EWTN News Nightly.
Beautiful story. Thank you, Catherine. 2 studies tonight delve into the economics of marriage. The National Marriage Project releases a report showing how marriage is linked to financial well-being. The study calculates the difference in income between young men and women raised by a mom and dad versus a single parent. It finds men from intact families make $6,500 more and women about $4,700 more than their peers from single-parent families. And you could call this a marriage premium. Married men make roughly $16,000 a year more than their single counterparts. These advantages extend across the population. The study says married African-American men enjoy a marriage premium of $12,500. Married men with a high school degree or less make $17,000 more per year than their single peers. And a study looking at the productivity of 10,000 parents in academia finds motherhood is not associated with low research productivity or fewer publications. It shows, however, that unmarried women who become parents do have lower productivity. One group, mothers under 30, also appears to have lower research productivity. Those results come from the Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis. They were released earlier this year. Melissa Braunstein published a response to the study of the Institute for Family Studies blog. She joins us now to talk more about it. You talked with one of the authors of this. So what is the secret to being both productive and a good parent?
I'd say it all boils down to good time management.
So moms probably have that pretty well worked out.
I think so, yeah. We're wired, it's wired into us, and if you didn't have it already, it's beaten into you by the daily grind of being a parent.
So does this mean that people can have it all? I mean, especially moms?
I'd say that's a little bit of a stretch. I think it's more realistic to aim for having it all not at the same time. The mothers in this study, for example, managed to be successful as academics, but during the years when their children were young, they saw their productivity drop.
So do they make a sacrifice for their career in terms of their parenting?
It sounds like over the course of 30 years, they actually are more productive, but in the short term when their children are young, they're not going to be publishing as much.
Can these results be generalized more toward a wider population, or is this a very small target?
It sounds like it's a little bit difficult to generalize all of them. It sounds like the findings are mostly better as guidelines than as rules for the wider population. For example, the academics who are in the study tend to have much more flexibility in their schedules than most working parents, so not everything that was in the study is going to be applicable to every working parent.
You're a working mom. How do you think this stacks up in your life?
I was cheered by the findings. I like hearing that over the course of 30 years I can be more productive, and that it's nice to know that you don't have to feel like you're making a trade-off, and that you can both have a really positive career trajectory and make time to have a happy family life.
So maybe you can have it all, just not at the same time, right?
I think so.
All right, Melissa Braunstein, thanks so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you.
Well, finally tonight, our minds are mainly on turkeys this week, but let's not forget those elves already hard at work. Well, they remembered Tuesday in Thailand, 1,700 people dressed like Santa's helpers, breaking the world's record for a gathering of elves. The previous record, set in the UK last year, was beaten by about 600 people. Everybody had to wear red and green clothing with pointed hats and ears to make this record count. On that note, until tomorrow, we invite you to like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, watch again if you'd like on EWTN's YouTube page. For all of us here at EWTN News Nightly, I'm Brian Patrick. We leave you tonight with a quick look back at the Pope's quick trip to Strasbourg, France. Good night and God bless you.